I never thought a cheap plastic pregnancy test would become the moment I finally snapped. It happened on a Tuesday evening, in the middle of our cluttered living room, while I was stepping over dirty laundry and half-empty juice boxes after finishing a 60-hour work week. My sister stood in front of me with one hand resting on her stomach, smiling like she had just received a blessing from the universe. "I'm pregnant," she said. For the sixth time. My heart didn't jump. My face didn't light up. Instead, my stomach sank so hard it felt like my body already knew what my mind was trying to avoid. Because that announcement wasn't about her. It was about me. It meant more daycare pickups, more school meetings, more midnight fevers, more grocery bills, more sleepless mornings. It meant I would be the one packing lunches, paying utilities, calming tantrums, and stretching cheap pasta into dinner for children who weren't mine, while their mother slept in and their father stayed glued to the couch. I had already spent 3 years raising her kids. 3 years, paying rent, electricity, and internet. 3 years, skipping my own dreams so her life wouldn't fall apart. 3 years, being called selfish anytime I tried to set a boundary. And standing there in that moment, watching her rub her belly while waiting for me to nod and accept my new sentence, something inside me finally cracked. I told her I was done. Her smile vanished instantly. She called me ungrateful. She threatened to kick me out. She said I owed her. But what she did next, what she would do in the days that followed, went far beyond emotional manipulation. She tried to steal my identity. She destroyed my career opportunity. She attempted to frame me for a crime. And when I finally escaped in the middle of the night with my life packed into trash bags, she called the police and showed up at my door crying like the victim, hoping to ruin me completely. But she didn't know one thing. Someone inside that house had been watching everything. So, if you've ever been trapped in a family where your kindness is treated like weakness, where your hard work becomes someone else's entitlement, stay with me, because what started as a pregnancy announcement turned into a battle for my freedom, my future, and my dignity. And I promise you, the ending is not what she expected. My name is Miranda. I'm 26 years old, and at the time this story began, I was working as a warehouse manager in Reno, Nevada. I never planned on becoming a full-time caregiver to 5 children who weren't mine. But life doesn't always wait for your permission. For 3 years, I balanced pallets during the day and packed lunchboxes at night. I lifted heavy boxes at work, then came home to lift toddlers onto my hip. I memorized inventory codes and spelling lists in the same breath. I wasn't just my sister's sibling anymore, I was the backbone of her entire household. And I didn't even realize how deep I was drowning until the evening she told me she was pregnant. Again. It was a Tuesday. I had just finished a brutal 60-hour work week and walked into our crowded living room, stepping over piles of dirty laundry and scattered toys. My feet ached, my shoulders burned, and all I wanted was 5 minutes of silence. Instead, my sister Jada stood in front of me, with one hand resting on her stomach and a smug little smile curling at the corner of her lips. "I'm pregnant," she said casually. Sixth time. I felt something twist sharply in my chest. Not excitement, not surprise, pure exhaustion. Because I already knew what that meant. More diapers, more daycare fees, more school drop-offs, more medical appointments, more late nights, more money that somehow always came out of my paycheck. Her boyfriend Derek was stretched out on the couch behind her, scrolling on his phone like the world owed him comfort. He didn't look up, didn't smile, didn't say congratulations. They were waiting for me to accept it, waiting for me to step up. Again. I had just worked 12 straight days without a break. I was paying the rent. I was covering utilities. I was buying groceries. I was helping with homework. I was waking up at 4 every morning to make breakfast and braid hair before school. I had spent my entire adult life holding together a family that wasn't even mine. And standing there in that messy living room, something inside me finally snapped into clarity. I took a breath and said the words I'd been holding back for years. "I'm done." Jada's smile disappeared instantly. Her eyes darkened. "What do you mean you're done?" she snapped. "I mean, I'm not paying for this baby. I'm not funding your lifestyle anymore." Her face twisted with rage. She started yelling, calling me selfish, ungrateful, accusing me of abandoning family. Then she dropped the threat that told me exactly how she saw me. If you don't help, you can get out. Don't think for 1 second you're too important to replace. That was the moment I realized something painful. I wasn't her sister. I was her resource. I looked around the room, the toys I bought, the furniture I paid for, the kids I raised, and felt a cold heaviness settle in my stomach. But what I didn't know yet was that this argument was only the beginning. Because in the days that followed, Jada wouldn't just demand my labor. She would steal my identity. She would destroy my career opportunity. She would try to frame me for a crime. And she would call the police on me when I finally escaped. At the time, though, all I felt was tired. Bone-deep tired. The kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. That night, my alarm went off at 4 in the morning, just like always. I dragged myself out of bed while Jada and Derek slept behind a locked door. I made breakfast, packed lunches, checked homework, got the kids dressed, cleaned up beer bottles Derek had left on the counter. I reviewed math problems with my 10-year-old nephew while braiding my niece's hair. I soothed the toddler crying in his crib while his parents snored 10 feet away. By 7 a.m., I had already lived a full day. Then I drove to the warehouse. That was my life. Work all day, parent all night, repeat. And the worst part wasn't even the physical exhaustion. It was knowing that no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. I was slowly sacrificing my future to keep theirs comfortable. College plans delayed. Savings drained. Dreams put on pause. All so my sister could keep having children she didn't take responsibility for. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that she'd get back on her feet, that Derek would find steady work, that things would change. But deep down, I knew the truth. They weren't planning to change. They were planning to keep using me. So when Jada announced baby number 6, something inside me finally woke up. I didn't realize it yet, but that pregnancy test was the sharp edge that cut me free from my family. And if you've ever been the responsible one in a house full of takers, if you've ever felt like your kindness was being exploited, stay with me, because what happened next forced me to choose between saving my family and saving myself. And for the first time in my life, I chose me. The days after Jada's announcement blurred together into one long stretch of exhaustion. Every morning started the same way. My alarm went off at 4 a.m., slicing through whatever shallow sleep I managed to get. I would lie there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, gathering enough strength to swing my legs out of bed. Because if I didn't get up first, nothing in that house moved forward. I tiptoed down the hallway, careful not to wake Jada and Derek behind their locked bedroom door. Their room was always quiet, too quiet. Meanwhile, Leo's cries echoed from his crib just a few feet away, and it was always me who went to him. I'd scoop him up, balancing him on one hip while starting coffee with the other hand. Then came the routine I could practically do with my eyes closed. Pull bread from the freezer, pack 5 lunches, rinse yesterday's dishes, wipe the counters sticky with juice and syrup, and step over whatever Derek had left behind from his late-night gaming sessions. Some mornings, there were empty beer bottles lined up on the counter like trophies. Other days, it was greasy takeout containers or crushed soda cans. He never cleaned them, he just assumed I would. By 5:30, the older kids would start shuffling into the kitchen, still half asleep. I'd help Caleb with his math homework while Sophie ate cereal and complained about her tangled hair. Justin, the oldest, tried to help when he could, gathering backpacks or making sure his younger siblings had shoes on, but even he looked worn down by the constant noise and tension. I moved through those mornings like a soldier in a war zone, everything timed, every step calculated, diapers packed, permission slips signed, daycare bags loaded. I'd check the clock every few minutes because I had exactly 30 minutes to get everyone out the door before I had to leave for my warehouse shift. Somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, I'd pause outside Jada and Derek's bedroom. The door was always locked. They slept while I raised their children. That realization sat in my chest like a stone. By the time I dropped the younger kids at daycare and the older ones at the bus stop, my heart was already racing. Then I'd speed toward the industrial district, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me upright. Work was hard, but it was simple. Boxes didn't lie. Machines didn't manipulate. Physical labor was easier than the emotional weight waiting for me at home. That afternoon, during my lunch break, my phone buzzed with a notification that made my stomach drop. Final utility warning. I stared at the screen, confused. I had given Jada $600 just the week before to cover the electric bill. She'd promised it was taken care of. I left work early and drove home, my pulse pounding in my ears. There it was, bright red paper taped to the front door. Shut off notice. 3 months overdue. I stood on the porch shaking, my hands curled into fists. Inside the kitchen trash can, buried beneath snack wrappers and empty cups, I found a crumpled receipt. Designer maternity clothes. Every dollar I'd handed her gone. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I just quietly transferred the money I'd been saving for my next semester of college to the utility company so the lights wouldn't go out on 5 innocent kids. That was the moment I realized I was burning my future to keep her present comfortable. And the day still wasn't over. As I walked back into the warehouse to finish my shift, my phone rang again. This time, it was the middle school. My 13-year-old niece had been caught skipping class and arguing with a teacher. Jada didn't answer her phone. So I clocked out early, losing hours I couldn't afford, and sat in a plastic chair outside the principal's office. Megan wouldn't look at me at first. When she finally did, her eyes filled with tears. She told me she felt invisible at home, that her mom only cared about the new baby, that she acted out because she didn't know how else to be seen. I held her hand and promised her I'd do better, even though I was already carrying more than I could handle. That night, I dragged myself through the front door at nearly 7 o'clock. Derek was on the couch watching sports. The kids complained they were hungry. So I went straight to the kitchen and boiled water for spaghetti, the fastest, cheapest meal I could manage. Jada eventually came out of the bedroom, wearing one of her new outfits, and immediately started criticizing the mess. We sat down to eat. Derek took one bite, pushed his plate away, and said the sauce was bland. Then he asked why I hadn't made steak. I stared at this grown man, who hadn't paid a bill, cooked a meal, or lifted a finger for his own children, and felt something hot rise behind my eyes. I had just sacrificed my tuition money to keep the electricity on for his video games, and he wanted steak. That night, lying in bed, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't temporary. This was my life. They weren't struggling. They were comfortable letting me struggle for them. And I finally understood that if I didn't change something soon, I was going to lose myself completely. I just didn't know yet how far they were willing to go to keep control over me. I tried to convince myself that the electricity bill incident was just another mistake, that Jada had panicked and spent the money impulsively, that maybe, somehow, things would still turn around. But deep down, I already knew better. Something fundamental had shifted. The house felt heavier after that day, like the walls themselves were tired of holding secrets. Jada stopped pretending to be grateful. Derek stopped pretending to be polite. And I stopped pretending I wasn't being taken advantage of. 3 days after the pregnancy announcement, Jada called what she described as a family meeting. I was sitting on the living room floor folding a mountain of laundry when there was a sharp knock at the door, slow, deliberate, authoritative. I didn't even need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Grandma Lorraine. She arrived with her purse clutched tightly against her chest, and disappointment already painted across her face. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't offer to help with the kids. She walked straight into the living room like she owned the place, and sat down on the couch beside Jada, who immediately placed one hand on her stomach like a shield. Derek hovered in the doorway, arms crossed, silent but present. I stayed on the floor, holding a pile of tiny socks in my lap, suddenly feeling like I was on trial. Grandma Lorraine cleared her throat. She said Jada had told her everything. About the pregnancy, about the stress, about how hard it was going to be with another baby on the way. Then she looked directly at me and presented her solution. She suggested I sell my car. Not temporarily. Not borrow it. Sell it. Her plan was to take the money from my reliable sedan and put it toward a down payment on a brand new seven-seater van for Jada. I honestly thought I had misheard her. That car was how I got to work, how I made money, how I attended night classes. It was the one piece of independence I still had. I tried to explain that calmly. I told her I needed my vehicle to keep my job, that without it, none of the bills would get paid. She shook her head slowly, like I was a stubborn child. "Miranda," she said, her voice sharp, "you're being selfish. Your sister is carrying a life inside her, and all you care about is that old car and a few dollars." The words hit harder than I expected. Selfish. After 3 years of raising her great-grandchildren, after paying utilities, after giving up my education fund, after waking up before sunrise every day to keep that household running, I stood up, my hands trembling, and said as evenly as I could, "That's my property. I won't sell my future to fix Jada's choices anymore." The room went cold. Grandma Lorraine left in a storm of muttered insults. Jada didn't speak to me for the rest of the evening, but that wasn't the end of it. Later that night, I went to my room and opened my banking app to check how much money I had left for gas after paying the electric bill. That's when I saw it. An email from my credit monitoring service. Subject line, "New account alert." My heart began to pound as I logged in. A credit card had been opened in my name. Not just opened, already maxed out. High-end baby furniture, designer crib, premium stroller set. My social security number had been used. My address, my credit. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the screen, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me. This wasn't carelessness. This was identity theft. My own sister had crossed a line I didn't even know she was capable of crossing. I felt physically sick. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to a small coffee shop on the edge of town. My best friend Tessa was already there, waiting. She worked as a paralegal, and when I slid my phone across the table showing her the charges, her face hardened instantly. She walked me through freezing my credit, disputing the account, documenting everything. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "If she did this once, she'll do it again. You need an exit plan." It's 7 Southard. I drove home with my chest tight, knowing she was right. When I walked through the front door, Jada was standing in the kitchen, tapping furiously on her phone. Her payment for a matching changing table had just been declined. She looked up at me, confused, then suspicious. I walked past her without a word. That night, the silence between us was thick and dangerous. And then, exactly 1 week later, something happened that made my hands shake in a completely different way. I rushed home from work not to cook or clean, but to intercept the mail. Mixed in with overdue notices was a thick, white envelope from a major tech company downtown. I tore it open right there in the driveway. It was an acceptance letter for a paid internship in systems analysis. The salary was more than double what I made at the warehouse. It came with a clear pathway into engineering. For the first time in years, I felt hope rise in my chest. I walked inside, smiling. That was my mistake. Jada saw it immediately. She grabbed the letter out of my hands, read it, and her face twisted with jealousy. Then she tore it in half, dropped it on the floor, and told me I was quitting school and work to stay home with her kids. That was the moment I finally understood. They didn't just want my help, they wanted ownership, and I was done letting them have it. I bent down slowly and picked up the torn pieces of that letter like they were fragments of a life I had been holding together with duct tape and hope. Jada stood over me, her arms crossed, breathing hard, waiting for me to react, waiting for tears, waiting for submission. I didn't give her either. Instead, I smoothed the wrinkled paper against my thigh and tucked it into my pocket. That silence seemed to irritate her more than screaming ever could. "So what?" she snapped. "You really think you're going somewhere?" Her voice echoed through the kitchen, bouncing off stained walls and cheap linoleum floors that I had scrubbed more times than I could count. Derek was sitting at the table nursing a soda, watching the whole thing like it was entertainment. Jada stepped closer, invading my space. "You're not leaving," she said. "With the baby coming, I need you here. You're going to quit school. You're going to quit that warehouse job. I can't be stressed right now." Action. The way she said it, like my entire existence was simply a line item on her pregnancy checklist, made something cold settle in my chest. I told her quietly that I had worked too hard to give up my future. That's when Derek finally opened his mouth. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "An office job?" he said. "Come on. You don't belong in some corporate building. A woman's place is at home, taking care of family. You should be grateful you're needed." I stared at him. This man hadn't paid rent in months. He hadn't changed diapers. He hadn't shown up to school meetings. But he felt entitled to tell me where I belonged. I didn't argue. I just looked at both of them and realized something terrifying. They genuinely believed they owned me. Jada's face twisted when she saw I wasn't backing down. She raised her voice, yelling loud enough that the kids could hear from their rooms. "You owe me this house," she screamed. "I gave you somewhere to live. I let you be here. If you walk out that door, don't ever come back." Her words were meant to scare me, but instead, they freed me. I met her eyes and said calmly, "You're right. I will go. And one day, you'll understand exactly what it costs to turn the only person helping you into an enemy." Derek snorted from his chair. "You won't last a week," he called out. "You'll come crawling back." I didn't respond. I walked down the hallway to my room and locked the door behind me. But I didn't start packing. Not yet. I knew they were listening. So I sat quietly on my bed, staring at the wall, letting my heart beat slow. I needed them to think I was defeated, that I'd cool off and fall back into line like always. About an hour later, when the house finally settled into uneasy silence, I slipped out into the garage under the excuse of checking laundry. The garage smelled like oil and dust. It was dim and cold, but it was the only place I felt like I could breathe. That's when I noticed a shadow shift near the workbench. Justin stepped forward. My 16-year-old nephew looked older than he should have, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders permanently tense. He didn't say anything at first. He just handed me a small, battered notebook. Inside were dates and times. Notes he'd written down quietly over weeks. Conversations he'd overheard between Jada and Grandma Lorraine. Plans about how they'd report my car stolen if I tried to leave. How they'd hide my documents. How they'd make sure I couldn't escape. My throat tightened. Justin swallowed hard and whispered, "Auntie, you need to go tonight. They're serious." I looked at this kid who had been forced to grow up too fast and felt a wave of guilt crash over me. Leaving meant abandoning him, but staying meant drowning. I hugged him tightly and told him I loved him. Then I went back to my room and waited. At midnight, when the house was wrapped in darkness and Derek's snoring rumbled through the walls, I finally moved. I didn't take photos. I didn't take keepsakes. I packed survival. My laptop, my birth certificate, my social security card, a week's worth of clothes. I stuffed everything into heavy black trash bags so it would look like I was just taking out garbage if anyone glanced out a window. Every step down the hallway felt too loud. My heart was beating so hard I was afraid it would wake the baby. Justin was waiting by the kitchen door like he promised. He silently grabbed the heaviest bags and led me outside. We avoided the garage and walked to where my car was parked on the street. The Nevada night air cut through my jacket as we loaded the trunk under flickering streetlights. Justin stood there, shivering in his thin hoodie, trying to look brave. I took his hands and said quietly, "I promise I'll come back for you and the kids when I'm strong enough, but right now, I have to save myself first." He nodded and stepped back. I started the car and let it roll downhill before turning on the engine, minimizing the noise. As I drove away, tears streamed down my face. But beneath the grief, there was relief. I didn't know it yet, but Jada would wake up in a few hours expecting coffee, childcare, and control only to find an empty room. And that was when everything would finally start to collapse. I drove for nearly 40 minutes before I finally pulled into the cracked parking lot of a rundown apartment complex on the other side of Reno. It wasn't much, a narrow studio, above a noisy laundromat, flickering hallway lights, a stairwell that smelled faintly of cigarettes and detergent. But to me, it felt like freedom. Tessa had managed to help me secure the place in less than a day. There was no furniture except a bare mattress on the floor, and I didn't even bother locking the door after I collapsed onto it. My body was too exhausted to care. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the hum of washing machines below, letting the silence wrap around me. For the first time in years, there were no kids crying, no doors slamming, no voices demanding something from me. Just quiet. I must have fallen asleep almost immediately, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was cutting through the thin blinds and my phone was vibrating violently against the hardwood floor. I picked it up and felt my stomach drop. 99 missed calls, hundreds of messages, all from Jada. The first texts were confused. Where are you? Did you take the trash out? Then they turned desperate. Please call me. The kids are asking for you. By the time I scrolled halfway down, the tone had shifted completely. You're selfish. You think you can just leave? You owe me. I pressed play on the most recent voicemail. Her voice came through shrill and venomous. You're an ungrateful brat. I'm calling the police. I'll tell them you stole my money. You'll pay for this. I sat there on the edge of that mattress, holding my phone with shaking hands. But something strange happened. I didn't panic. For the first time, her threats didn't feel powerful. They felt hollow, because she wasn't screaming at me from the kitchen anymore. She wasn't standing over me. She didn't control the room I was sitting in. I saved the voicemail as evidence and blocked her number. Then I got up and started my first day as a free woman. I showered quickly, pulled on clean clothes, and made myself instant coffee in a chipped mug I'd brought from the house. It tasted terrible, but it was mine. I spent the morning calling my bank, confirming my credit freeze, and setting up alerts for any suspicious activity. I forwarded screenshots to Tessa and updated my resume. Every small action felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. But peace doesn't like to stay quiet for long. Less than 48 hours later, I was sitting on the mattress reviewing onboarding documents for my internship when flashing red and blue lights filled the room. At first, I thought there had been an accident outside. Then came the pounding. Not polite knocking, aggressive, authoritative pounding that rattled the doorframe and sent a shock straight through my spine. I stood up slowly and walked to the door, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. Through the peephole, I saw two uniformed officers. And standing behind them, pretending to wipe tears from her eyes, was Jada. My sister had actually brought the police to my new address. I opened the door with my hands visible. The older officer stepped forward while his partner positioned himself slightly to block the hallway. His voice was firm and practiced. Miss Miranda, we received a report requesting a welfare check on a minor and an allegation that you've stolen assets valued at approximately $10,000. My stomach dropped. Before I could respond, Jada pushed past them dramatically. She pointed at me, crying loudly enough for neighbors to open their doors. She took my money, she sobbed. She stole Grandma's jewelry and ran away. She abandoned the kids. Please, arrest her. I felt dizzy. I took a deep breath and stepped aside. Please, I said quietly, you can look around. There was nothing to hide. No jewelry. No stolen cash. Just a bare mattress, trash bags of clothes, and a folding chair. The officers searched my belongings while Jada stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her fake tears turning into a smug smile. She thought she had won. Then I heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. I looked up and saw Justin. He was breathing hard, sweat on his forehead like he'd run the whole way. He walked straight past his mother without looking at her and held up his phone to the officer. Mom is lying, he said, his voice shaking but steady. Here's the video. I have. The officer took the phone. The screen showed Jada the night before, laughing while she wrapped Grandma's jewelry box in a towel and shoved it under her own mattress. My knees almost buckled. The room went silent. The younger officer stopped searching. The older one handed the phone back to Justin and turned slowly toward Jada. His tone changed completely. Ma'am, filing a false police report is a serious offense. Jada tried to stammer out excuses, but it was over. She lunged toward Justin, screaming that he was a traitor, but the officer stepped between them. I stood there watching everything unravel. She had tried to destroy me. Instead, she exposed herself. And that was only the beginning of the consequences she would face. After the officers left that night, my apartment felt impossibly quiet. Justin had hugged me before following his mother back down the stairs, his face pale but determined. I stood in the doorway for a long time after they disappeared, replaying everything in my mind. The flashing lights, Jada's fake tears, the way her expression shifted when the truth finally caught up to her. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, because even though she had tried to ruin me, she was still my sister. And Justin was still walking back into that house. I barely slept. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every vibration of my phone sent my heart racing, even though I had blocked her number. Around dawn, I finally drifted off for a few hours, only to wake up to a message from Tessa. She told me the officer had filed a mandatory report with Child Services due to the false accusation and the video Justin provided. That's when reality truly set in. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was official. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on my new routine. I started orientation for my internship. I learned names, passwords, and workflows. I smiled at coworkers while my mind drifted back to 5 kids eating cereal in a dark kitchen. Every time I checked my email, I half expected another emergency. The call came 3 days later. A caseworker had gone to the house unannounced. What they found was worse than I had imagined. There was black mold creeping up the bathroom walls. The refrigerator held nothing but expired milk and condiments. The electricity had been shut off again because Jada refused to pay the bill once I stopped covering it. The younger kids were dirty, tired, underfed. Hearing that made something in my chest collapse. I had spent years buffering that chaos with my own money and energy. Without me there, the truth had nowhere left to hide. Child Protective Services moved quickly. They documented everything. They interviewed the kids. They reviewed Justin's video and the police report. By the end of the week, an emergency hearing was scheduled. Jada didn't call me. She showed up at my workplace. I was in the middle of onboarding paperwork when the receptionist said there was a woman in the lobby demanding to see me. I already knew. I stepped out to find my sister pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Her hair was tangled, her eyes wild. The moment she saw me, she collapsed onto her knees right there on the polished floor. In front of security. In front of my coworkers. She grabbed the hem of my skirt and wailed, "Miranda, please. I'll do anything." Derek left. I can't lose the kids. You have to help me. People stopped walking. Phones came out. My face burned with embarrassment, but I forced myself to stay calm. She was trying one last time to weaponize my compassion. I gently pulled my skirt from her hands and stepped back. "I raised your kids for 3 years," I said quietly. "But you never acted like their mother. This is something you have to face." Security escorted her out while she screamed my name down the hallway. That night, Derek officially disappeared. He waited until Jada fell asleep and packed his bags. He took whatever cash he could find and left without saying goodbye to the kids. Just gone. His loyalty lasted exactly as long as life was easy. The emergency hearing happened the following week. I didn't attend, but the caseworker called me afterward. The judge reviewed photos of the house, medical notes from the pediatric clinic, and the police documentation. Jada stood there, shaking not from concern for her children, but from the realization that her safety net was gone. The order came down fast. The children were removed from the home. Justin was separated from his younger siblings and placed with a temporary foster family. Jada was assigned community service hours and fined for filing a false report. I sat on my bed, holding my phone after the call ended, staring at the wall. I had tried to protect those kids quietly for years. It took the system less than 2 weeks to confirm what I had been covering up the entire time. Guilt flooded me in waves. If I had left sooner, would this have happened earlier? If I had stayed, would it have gotten worse? There were no clean answers. I only knew that staying would have destroyed me completely. A month passed, then 2. My internship turned into a full-time offer. I moved into a better apartment with actual furniture and windows that didn't rattle when buses drove by. I started meeting with a financial advisor and quietly opened a protected education trust for Justin and his siblings. The paperwork was precise. Jada could never touch that money. Justin emailed me every week. He was doing better in school. His foster family encouraged him to study. He told me he missed his brothers and sisters, but he finally felt safe. That mattered more than anything. Word about the rest of my family filtered in through distant relatives. Grandma Lorraine had suffered a mild stroke from the stress of the court hearings. Without my income to help with medications or housing, she was placed in a state-funded nursing facility on the outskirts of Reno. She tried calling me. I didn't answer. Jada ended up working overnight shifts at a laundromat to pay off her fines. I didn't feel satisfaction in any of it, just clarity. 6 months later, I stood in my office overlooking the lights of Las Vegas and caught my reflection in the glass. I wasn't tired anymore. I wasn't afraid. I had rebuilt my credit. I had reclaimed my future. And for the first time in my life, I understood something deeply. You can love people, but you don't have to let them destroy you. 6 months after everything fell apart, I stood alone in the elevator of a glass office tower in Las Vegas, watching the floor numbers light up one by one. I still wasn't used to this version of my life. The quiet mornings, the clean apartment, the fact that when I came home from work, nothing was broken, screaming, or demanding something from me. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for chaos that never came. My internship had turned into a full-time position faster than I expected. They brought me on as a junior systems analyst, and the starting salary alone was more than Jada and Derek had made combined in the last 3 years. I wore ID badges instead of stained aprons now. I attended meetings instead of parent-teacher conferences. My biggest daily stress was a software deadline, not whether the lights would be shut off again. And yet, some days, I still woke up with phantom anxiety, reaching for a phone that wasn't ringing anymore. Healing isn't instant. It comes in quiet waves. I moved into a modern apartment 10 minutes from the strip. White walls, clean floors, a balcony that overlooked the desert at sunset. I bought myself a small couch and a plant that somehow survived my learning curve, with watering schedules. It felt strange to spend money on myself instead of groceries for 7 people. But every time guilt crept in, I reminded myself, I earned this. Justin and I stayed in touch through email. His foster family encouraged his academic interests, and for the first time, he talked about college like it was something real instead of something other people got to do. I deposited part of every paycheck into the education trust I'd set up for him and his siblings. The terms were airtight. No early withdrawals, no parental access. That money was for their future, not their mother's emergencies. Sometimes Justin would send me pictures of his homework or screenshots of good grades. Other times he'd just write short messages, telling me about his day. I saved every single one. The rest of my family faded into distant echoes. Grandma Lorraine tried calling from the nursing facility a few times, but I didn't pick up. I wasn't cruel, I just knew reopening that door would pull me back into a world I had barely escaped. The facility wasn't luxurious. It was understaffed and smelled faintly of antiseptic, according to relatives. But it was what remained quietly available to someone who had alienated the only person willing to carry everyone else. Jada bounced between friends' couches before landing a night shift at a 24-hour laundromat. I heard she worked under flickering fluorescent lights, folding strangers' clothes until her back ached. She looked older than her age now, gray strands appearing in her hair, bitterness carved deep around her mouth. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't feel triumphant. I just accepted it as the natural consequence of choices finally catching up. Once, a mutual cousin sent me a message saying Jada still blamed me for everything. She told anyone who would listen that I had abandoned her in her darkest moment. I didn't respond. Because the truth was simple. I didn't abandon her. I stopped enabling her. There's a difference. Sometimes I replayed moments from the old house in my mind. The locked bedroom door, while I soothed crying babies. The receipt in the trash. The torn acceptance letter on the kitchen floor. The sound of Justin's voice in that hallway, telling the police the truth. Those memories no longer hurt the way they used to. They felt like reminders of what happens when you stay silent too long, of what happens when love turns into obligation, of how easy it is to lose yourself while trying to save everyone else. One afternoon, as I walked out of a meeting with senior executives who actually listened when I spoke, I caught my reflection in the conference room glass. I barely recognized myself. My shoulders were relaxed. My eyes were clear. I looked like someone who owned her own future. And that's when it really hit me. They had tried to take everything from me. My money, my credit, my career, my peace. They even tried to turn the law against me. But they failed. Not because I was stronger than them, because I finally chose myself. People sometimes ask if I regret cutting them off, if I think I should have given Jada one more chance. I always tell them the same thing. You can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. I loved my nieces and nephews with everything I had, but loving their mother nearly destroyed me. Walking away didn't mean I stopped caring. It meant I stopped sacrificing my life for someone who saw me as disposable. And maybe that's the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't staying. It's leaving. Even after my life finally stabilized, I learned that healing doesn't arrive all at once. It shows up in small, quiet moments. Like the first time I realized I could sleep through the night without being jolted awake by a crying baby or a slammed door. Or the first grocery trip where I didn't automatically calculate how to stretch food for 7 people. Or the first paycheck where I didn't immediately feel panic about who needed it more than I did. Freedom didn't feel explosive. It felt unfamiliar. At first, I filled my evenings with busy work, organizing cabinets, rearranging furniture, wiping already clean counters, because my body was still programmed for constant crisis. Sitting still felt wrong. Peace made me anxious. Some nights, I would sit on my balcony watching the desert sky darken and catch myself listening for sounds that weren't there anymore. No yelling, no cartoons blaring, no Derek stomping around looking for something he'd misplaced and somehow blaming me for. Just wind, just traffic in the distance, just my own breathing. That was when the emotional weight of everything finally began to surface. I cried for the version of myself who thought love meant endurance. I cried for the years I spent minimizing my own needs. I cried for Justin and his siblings, who had grown up too fast in a house that demanded resilience instead of nurturing. But I also started doing something I had never allowed myself to do before. I started planning. Not survival planning, future planning. I met with a financial advisor and learned how to rebuild credit the right way. We talked about investments, retirement accounts, and emergency funds, things that had always felt like luxuries in my old life. I created a budget that included savings for myself, not just everyone else. And then I did something that mattered more to me than any promotion or paycheck. I established an education trust for Justin and his siblings. I spent hours with attorneys, making sure every detail was airtight. The funds couldn't be accessed early. No parent could touch them. No loopholes. No emotional manipulation. That money would be waiting for them when they turned 18. College, trade school, whatever path they chose, it would be theirs. I didn't tell Jada. I didn't announce it to the family. This wasn't about making a statement. It was about protecting futures quietly. Justin cried when I told him. Not loudly. Just silent tears over a video call while he nodded and thanked me over and over. That moment alone made everything worth it. He was adjusting to his foster home slowly. He said it felt strange to have meals served at the same time every day. Strange to have adults who followed through on promises. Strange to be asked how he was doing and actually listened to. He told me his grades were improving. He told me he started thinking about college. I told him I was proud of him. Every single time. Meanwhile, news about Jada reached me in fragments. She struggled to keep steady housing. She bounced between short-term rentals and friends who eventually got tired of the drama. The laundromat job barely covered her court fees and basic expenses. She tried to reconnect with relatives, but most of them had finally seen what I had been shielding for years. People who once told me to be patient now understood why I left. Grandma Lorraine's health continued to decline. The nursing facility wasn't comfortable, but it was consistent. She left voicemails from time to time, apologizing in broken phrases, asking if we could talk. I listened to them once. Then, I deleted them. Not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. Because I knew how easily guilt could pull me backward. I had worked too hard to reclaim myself. Sometimes I wondered if Jada ever truly understood what she lost. Not just financial support. Not just childcare. She lost the one person who showed up every day without being asked. She lost stability. She lost trust. She lost a sister who would have gone to the ends of the earth for her children. But accountability doesn't care about intention. It only responds to action. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth. When it hit me, I was smiling. Not forced. Not polite. Real. That's when I realized how far I had come. I no longer lived in constant anticipation of someone else's needs. I no longer measured my worth by how much I could give away. I no longer apologized for existing. I had boundaries now. Strong ones. And they didn't make me cold. They made me healthy. People sometimes tell me I'm brave. I don't think that's true. I think I was just tired enough to stop accepting abuse. I was tired enough to choose myself. And once you cross that line, there's no going back. Because you finally understand something essential. You are not responsible for fixing people who refuse to change. You are not obligated to destroy your own life to keep someone else comfortable. You are allowed to walk away from anyone who treats your love like a resource. Even family. Especially family. And that's the truth I carry with me now, into every meeting, every quiet morning, every peaceful night. I didn't just escape. I rebuilt. And I will never again confuse sacrifice with love. Even now, when I think about everything that happened, there are moments that replay in my mind like scenes from someone else's life. Not because they feel distant, but because I've changed so much that I barely recognize the woman I used to be. There was a time when I measured my value by how much I could carry, how many bills I could pay, how many kids I could calm, how many times I could say, "It's okay," while silently falling apart. I thought love meant endurance, that loyalty meant self-erasure. Leaving that house taught me something painful but necessary. You don't heal by staying in the place that's hurting you. You heal by walking away, even when it feels selfish. Some mornings, I wake up before my alarm out of habit. My body still remembers the chaos. I'll lie there for a moment, heart racing, expecting to hear Leo crying or Jada yelling for coffee. But the apartment stays quiet. No slammed doors. No accusations. Just sunlight creeping across clean walls. That silence used to scare me. Now it feels sacred. Work has become a place of focus instead of escape. I sit in meetings with people who respect my input. My manager actually asks how I'm doing. My calendar is filled with projects instead of emergency school calls. I bring lunch that I made just for myself. That alone still feels surreal. On Fridays, I sometimes walk down to a small cafe near my building and sit by the window with a notebook, writing plans for my future. Not survival lists. Real goals, certifications I want to pursue, places I want to travel, the kind of life I never believed I was allowed to imagine. Justin emails me regularly. He tells me about classes, about friends he's starting to trust, about teachers who see potential in him. He jokes more now. He sounds lighter. Sometimes he asks for advice about homework. Other times, he just sends memes. I save them all. He once told me something that stayed with me. He said, "Aunt Miranda, I didn't know homes were supposed to be quiet." That sentence broke my heart and healed it at the same time. The trust fund grows slowly, month by month. I don't talk about it publicly. It isn't for praise, it's for protection. One day, when those kids are old enough to choose their own paths, they'll have options. That matters more than anything else. As for Jada, I stopped following updates through family gossip, but every once in a while, something finds its way back to me. She still tells people I ruined her life. She still refuses to acknowledge her role in what happened. She still believes she was entitled to everything I gave. And that's okay. I don't need her to understand. I only needed her to stop hurting me. I ran into Derek once, by accident, at a grocery store across town. He looked smaller somehow, less confident. He avoided my eyes and hurried past like I was a ghost. I didn't say a word. Some stories don't need closure. They just need distance. Grandma Lorraine's condition continues to decline. I heard she asks about me sometimes, confused, mixing up memories. I wish her peace. I truly do. But I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconnection. You can release resentment without reopening wounds. Therapy helped me untangle the guilt. It helped me understand that I was conditioned to prioritize everyone else, that I had been praised for self-sacrifice until it became my identity. That saying no felt dangerous because it had always come with punishment. Now, I practice something radical. I say no. I rest. I eat when I'm hungry. I leave rooms that feel heavy. I choose people who choose me back. That's not cruelty. That's growth. One evening, while walking home under the warm glow of streetlights, I caught my reflection in a shop window. I saw a woman who stands straighter, who makes eye contact, who doesn't flinch at raised voices anymore. And I smiled. Because I finally understand this. Being strong doesn't mean carrying everyone. Sometimes it means putting the weight down. I didn't abandon my family. I escaped a system that was built on my silence. I didn't betray anyone. I honored myself. And if there's one thing I hope anyone listening to this takes away, it's this. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. You are not heartless for setting boundaries. And you are not obligated to stay in places that drain you just because you share DNA. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away and build something better on the other side. There was a moment, not long after everything finally settled, when I realized I had stopped flinching. It happened on an ordinary Wednesday evening. I was standing in my kitchen, stirring soup on the stove, when a loud noise came from the hallway outside my apartment. Someone had dropped something heavy. A few months earlier, my heart would have jumped straight into my throat. My body had been trained to expect chaos. But this time, I barely reacted. I just kept stirring. That's when I understood that I was no longer living in survival mode. I was living. My days started to feel normal in ways I never thought I'd experience. I woke up without an alarm screaming at me before sunrise. I drank coffee while sitting down. I chose what I wanted to eat, instead of calculating what would stretch the farthest. I went to work, did my job, came home, and rested. No one yelled my name from another room. No one handed me a crying child. No one blamed me for problems I didn't create. It was quiet, and slowly, that quiet became familiar. I began therapy, something I had always told myself I couldn't afford, not financially, but emotionally. In those sessions, I unpacked years of being the responsible one, the fixer, the buffer, the person everyone leaned on while pretending I didn't need support too. My therapist once said something that stuck with me. You were taught that love means sacrifice, but real love includes reciprocity. I had never had reciprocity. I had only had obligation. And once I saw that clearly, there was no unseeing it. Justin continued to grow into himself. He started joining after-school programs. He told me about a science project he was excited about. He sent me photos of a certificate he earned for improved attendance. Every message from him felt like proof that breaking the cycle mattered. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was becoming. That was everything. Sometimes he asked if I was okay. Not because he had to. Because he cared. Those simple words still get to me. Meanwhile, the echoes of my old life faded further into the background. Jada stopped trying to contact me directly after realizing I wasn't responding. She still told her version of the story to anyone who would listen, but fewer people were listening now. Truth has a way of spreading quietly. I heard that she tried enrolling in job training programs but quit halfway through, that she complained about how unfair everything was, that she still believed I had abandoned her instead of acknowledging that she had driven me away. I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I didn't feel the need to. Because the people who mattered already knew, and the people who didn't get access to me anymore. One afternoon, while organizing old files on my laptop, I came across photos from years ago. Pictures of birthday cakes I baked at midnight, school projects spread across my dining table, kids asleep on my shoulder while their parents argued in the next room. I sat there staring at those images, feeling both proud and heartbroken. Proud that I showed up. Heartbroken that I had to. I realized then that I had been trying to save everyone except myself. Now, I was finally included in my own life. I started doing small things just because they made me happy. Weekend walks, cooking new recipes, buying books instead of groceries in bulk, sitting on my balcony, with music playing softly while the city lights came on. I learned what my favorite color actually was. I learned how I like my coffee. I learned that I don't have to earn rest. And slowly, gently, I learned how to trust again. Not everyone, just myself. There's a strange grief that comes with freedom. You mourn the years you lost while celebrating the ones you're finally living. Some nights, I still think about the younger version of me, the girl who believed she had to carry everything alone. I wish I could go back and tell her this. You don't have to prove your worth by suffering. You don't owe anyone your future. And leaving doesn't make you heartless. It makes you honest. I don't hate Jada. I don't wish harm on Derek. I don't carry bitterness toward Grandma Lorraine. I simply accept that they chose their paths, and I chose mine. And mine leads forward. I used to think strength meant staying. Now I know it sometimes means walking away with shaking hands and trusting that something better exists on the other side. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're the one paying the bills, raising the kids, holding everything together while being told you're selfish for wanting more, I need you to hear this clearly. You are allowed to leave situations that drain you. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to build a life that doesn't revolve around other people's chaos. Family is not defined by blood. It's defined by respect. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for everyone involved is to stop enabling dysfunction and start protecting your own future. I didn't escape just to survive. I escaped to live. And every quiet morning, every honest smile, every boundary I hold is proof that it was the right decision. There's something no one tells you about rebuilding your life after trauma. It isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It happens in small, ordinary moments that don't look heroic from the outside. It's realizing you can walk into your apartment without bracing yourself for conflict. It's opening your fridge and knowing the food inside is yours. It's checking your bank account and seeing money that isn't already mentally spent on someone else's emergency. It's learning how to breathe again. I used to think freedom would feel loud, like fireworks, like a movie ending where everything suddenly makes sense. Instead, it felt like waking up in a clean room after years of noise. Some mornings, I still caught myself moving too fast, rushing through routines that no longer existed. I'd finish getting ready and stand there for a moment, confused, because there was nothing left to prepare for. No lunches to pack, no backpacks to chase down, no arguments waiting in the kitchen. Just me. At first, that felt lonely. Then it started to feel peaceful. I kept going to therapy. Week after week, I peeled back layers I didn't even realize were there. I talked about how I learned early that love meant being useful, that praise only came when I sacrificed, that saying no always came with consequences. My therapist helped me see that I hadn't just been helping my family. I had been conditioned. Conditioned to minimize myself. Conditioned to tolerate disrespect. Conditioned to confuse responsibility with obligation. Once you see that pattern, it's impossible to ignore it. I began practicing boundaries in small ways, declining invitations that felt draining, ending conversations when they turned manipulative, not explaining myself over and over when someone didn't want to understand. Every boundary felt awkward at first, then empowering. Justin continued to grow stronger, both emotionally and academically. His emails became longer. His jokes came back. He told me about a teacher who encouraged him to join a coding club. He asked me questions about my job, curious about how systems worked, how problems got solved. I could hear hope in his voice. That alone made everything worth it. I visited him once, carefully, through the proper channels. He looked healthier, taller, less tense. He hugged me tight and whispered thank you, like he was afraid to say it too loudly. I held him and told him how proud I was. Not just for being brave, for staying kind. That matters. The trust fund continued to grow quietly in the background. It wasn't huge, it wasn't flashy, but it was consistent. It represented something no one could take from them anymore: choice. I didn't tell anyone else in the family about it. I learned that not everything needs an audience. Some things are sacred. Meanwhile, my own life began to take shape in ways I had never allowed myself to imagine. I signed up for additional certifications through work. I started setting aside money for travel. I bought myself a real bed instead of sleeping on a mattress on the floor. I hung art on my walls. I planted herbs on my balcony. I started cooking meals because I enjoyed them, not because I had to stretch ingredients across too many plates. Sometimes, in the middle of something ordinary, folding laundry, walking to the store, brushing my hair, I would suddenly feel overwhelmed with gratitude. Not for what I lost. For what I gained. Peace. Autonomy. Self-respect. I thought about Jada less and less. Not because she stopped existing, but because she stopped occupying space in my mind. I no longer replayed conversations or imagined alternate endings. I no longer wondered what I could have done differently. I had done everything I could. More than enough. People who heard my story sometimes asked if I hated her. I don't. Hate would require emotional energy she no longer deserves. What I feel is acceptance. Acceptance that she made choices. Acceptance that those choices had consequences. Acceptance that I am not responsible for managing her emotions or fixing her life. That realization changed everything. There's a strange power that comes from letting go of responsibility for other adults. You stop absorbing chaos that doesn't belong to you. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You start showing up fully in your own life. One evening, as I watched the city lights from my balcony, I thought about the version of myself who once believed she had to carry everything alone. I wish I could sit beside her and tell her this. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. You don't have to be grateful for mistreatment. You don't have to stay where you're being used. And leaving doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest. I didn't walk away because I stopped caring. I walked away because I finally started caring about myself. That distinction matters. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped by family expectations, financial manipulation, or emotional guilt, I want you to know something. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to create distance from people who drain you. You are allowed to build a life that feels safe. Even if others don't understand. Even if they call you selfish. Even if they rewrite the story to protect their own image. Your healing does not require their approval. I didn't escape just to survive. I escaped to grow. And every quiet moment, every healthy boundary, every honest smile reminds me that walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. There was a point, somewhere along the way, when I realized I wasn't just recovering from everything that happened. I was redefining who I was allowed to be. For most of my life, I had been the dependable one, the fixer, the quiet backbone holding everyone else upright while slowly bending under the weight. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for help. I told myself that being needed meant being loved. Walking away from that house forced me to confront a hard truth. I had confused usefulness with worth. Once that realization settled in, everything began to change. I started noticing how often I apologized for things that weren't my fault, how instinctively I minimized my own needs, how uncomfortable I felt when people offered kindness without expecting something in return. Those habits didn't disappear overnight. They showed up in small ways, like hesitating before buying something nice for myself, like feeling guilty for resting on weekends, like catching myself explaining my decisions to people who had no right to question them. Healing isn't linear. It's a series of tiny corrections. I kept showing up to therapy. Some sessions were quiet, some were heavy. We talked about boundaries, about trauma responses, about how growing up in chaos trains your nervous system to expect danger even when you're finally safe. My therapist told me that what I was experiencing had a name: hypervigilance. I had spent so long anticipating conflict that peace felt suspicious. That made sense. I had lived in a home where raised voices meant trouble, where slammed doors signaled another crisis, where silence was never calm, it was just the pause before the next demand. So now, when things were calm, my body didn't know what to do with it. But slowly, that started to fade. I learned to sit in stillness. I learned to breathe through moments of anxiety instead of running from them. I learned that safety doesn't have to be earned. Justin continued to be my quiet reminder of why all of this mattered. He sent me photos of a science project he worked on. He told me he joined a coding club. He asked questions about my job and what it meant to analyze systems. Sometimes he would just message me to say goodnight. Those simple gestures carried so much weight. They told me he felt secure enough to think about the future. That he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was imagining. And every time he did, I felt something settle deeper inside me. This is why you left. Not just for yourself. But to break a cycle. I still thought about my younger nieces and nephews often. I wondered how they were adjusting, whether they missed the routines I used to keep, whether they remembered me packing lunches or reading bedtime stories. That part hurt. It always would. But I reminded myself that staying would not have protected them long term. It would have only prolonged an unstable situation. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that create space for real change. I couldn't save everyone, but I could stop sacrificing myself. My work life continued to evolve. I took on more responsibility, learned new systems, and began contributing to projects that actually excited me. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued my ideas instead of exploiting my effort. That was new. I noticed how differently I carried myself now, how I spoke with more confidence, how I no longer felt the need to over-explain, how I left meetings knowing my voice mattered. I started mentoring a junior employee who reminded me of myself, quiet, hardworking, unsure of her place in the room. I encouraged her the way I wish someone had encouraged me years ago. Watching her grow felt strangely healing. Sometimes, late at night, memories would still surface. Jada's face twisted in anger. Derek laughing at my dreams. Grandma Lorraine calling me selfish. The sound of Justin whispering in the garage, telling me to leave. Those moments are part of me. They always will be. But they don't define me anymore. They inform me. They remind me what I will never tolerate again. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like release. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like building a beautiful life, far away from the people who tried to break you. I don't wish suffering on any of them. I simply refuse to carry their chaos. There's a quiet strength that comes from choosing yourself after years of being chosen last. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need validation. It just shows up in the way you protect your peace, in the way you honor your boundaries, in the way you finally stop shrinking. One evening, while walking home under soft city lights, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Not relief, not excitement, calm. And that's when I knew I had crossed an invisible line. I was no longer running from my past. I was walking toward my future. If you're listening to this, and you feel stuck in a situation where your love is being used against you, I want you to hear something important. You are not responsible for fixing broken adults. You are not obligated to bleed for family. You are allowed to step away from manipulation. You are allowed to choose a life that feels safe. It doesn't make you heartless. It makes you brave. I didn't escape just to get away. I escaped to become who I was always meant to be. And every day I wake up in this quiet apartment, every message I receive from Justin, every boundary I hold without guilt reminds me of one simple truth. Walking away was the most loving decision I ever made for myself, and for the future I'm building. There's a strange moment that comes after you've survived something that almost broke you. It's when life becomes quiet enough for reflection. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty, but the kind that gives your thoughts space to breathe. That's where I found myself months later, sitting on my balcony as the sun dipped behind the buildings, holding a warm mug in my hands, and thinking about how drastically everything had changed. I used to measure time by emergencies. Now I measured it by ordinary things, work deadlines, grocery runs, emails from Justin. Ordinary had become extraordinary. I didn't realize how deeply chaos had shaped me until it was gone. For years, my nervous system had been calibrated to respond to crisis. Every raised voice, every slammed door, every unexpected bill had sent me into action mode. I had lived in a constant state of readiness, bracing for impact. Now, when something minor went wrong, like missing a bus or spilling coffee, I noticed how my body reacted differently. I didn't spiral. I adjusted. I breathed. I moved on. That was growth. I continued therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand myself better. We talked about how trauma doesn't always come from dramatic moments. It often comes from long-term emotional neglect, from being forced into adult responsibilities too young, from learning that love has conditions. I learned that what I experienced had a name: parentification. I had been turned into a caregiver long before I was ready, and praised for it until I forgot who I was outside of being useful. Naming it helped. Understanding it helped even more. Justin kept sending updates. He told me about a presentation he gave in class, about a book he was reading, about a teacher who encouraged him to apply for a summer program. He sounded hopeful, curious, alive. I could hear it in his words. That mattered more than anything else. I reminded him often that his story wasn't defined by where he started, that he had options now, that he didn't have to carry the weight of adult choices on his shoulders. Sometimes, he would reply with something simple like, "I'm trying, Aunt Miranda," and I would sit there staring at my phone, feeling both proud and heartbroken. Because kids shouldn't have to try so hard just to feel safe. I thought about Jada less frequently now, but every once in a while, something would surface: a memory, a comment from a distant relative, a random wave of sadness. I didn't suppress it. I let it pass. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating. I accepted that Jada might never take responsibility for what she did. She might always tell herself that I betrayed her, that the system was unfair, that everyone else was the problem. And that's okay. Her narrative no longer controls my reality. I learned that closure doesn't come from other people apologizing. It comes from deciding you're done waiting. Work continued to challenge me in good ways. I started contributing to bigger projects. I gained confidence, speaking up in meetings. My manager noticed my dedication and encouraged me to pursue additional certifications, offering support and flexibility. For the first time, someone in authority was investing in me instead of exploiting me. That felt revolutionary. I started mentoring a colleague who reminded me of my younger self: quiet, hardworking, unsure of her voice. I shared what I'd learned about boundaries, about advocating for yourself, about not burning out trying to be everything for everyone. Helping her helped me too. There's something healing about breaking cycles in real time. Some nights, I still replay the moment Jada tore up my acceptance letter on the kitchen floor. I remember how small I felt, how trapped, how alone. Then I look around my apartment at the plants on my windowsill, the books on my shelf, the soft light in my living room, and I realize how far I've come. That version of me survived something incredibly heavy. And she carried me here. I don't regret leaving. I regret staying as long as I did. But even that regret has softened into compassion. I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. Now I know better. And I do better. If you're listening to this and you feel like you're stuck in a family dynamic that drains you, if you're the one holding everything together while being told you're selfish for wanting more, I want you to hear something clearly. You don't owe your life to anyone. You don't have to earn your right to peace. You don't have to remain in spaces that harm you just because they're familiar. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. It means you chose to live. I didn't just leave a house. I left a cycle. I left a role that was never meant to be mine. I left a version of myself that believed suffering was proof of love. And in doing so, I found something I never thought I'd have: freedom. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet, steady kind that shows up in healthy relationships, restful sleep, and mornings that begin without fear. That's the kind of freedom that changes everything. And that's the kind I'm building, one peaceful day at a time. There's a moment that comes when you finally stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic music. It comes quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day, when you realize you haven't checked your phone in hours, expecting bad news. When your shoulders aren't permanently tense. When your breathing feels natural again. That's when I knew I was no longer living in reaction. I was living in choice. I used to wake up every morning bracing myself for whatever crisis Jada's household would throw at me. A missed school bus, a tantrum, an unpaid bill, Derek disappearing for hours, Grandma Lorraine calling to lecture me about duty and sacrifice. Now, my mornings begin with sunlight. Through clean windows and coffee I actually get to drink while it's hot. That difference still amazes me. I started noticing how my body responded to peace. My jaw unclenched, My headaches faded. I stopped jumping at loud noises. I learned that safety has a physical feeling to it, not just an emotional one. Healing had finally reached my nervous system. Justin kept growing in ways that made me both proud and painfully aware of what he had endured. He told me he joined a robotics club. He showed me a small project he built with wires and code. His foster parents encouraged his curiosity instead of dismissing it. He smiled more. He laughed more. Sometimes he asked me about college campuses. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I had helped create space for him to imagine a future. The education trust continued to build quietly in the background. Every deposit felt like an act of defiance against generational instability. It wasn't just money, it was possibility. I didn't share that with extended family. I had learned that protecting something sacred often means keeping it private. Jada still existed in the background of my life like a distant storm cloud. I heard she bounced between short-term housing and struggled to keep steady work. Occasionally, someone would tell me she blamed me for everything, that she told people I destroyed her family. I let her believe whatever she needed to. My truth didn't require her agreement. There was a time when those words would have pierced me, when I would have rushed to defend myself or explain my side. Now, I understood something important. People who benefit from your silence often resent your boundaries. That's not your problem. I ran into Grandma Lorraine's name on a hospital update through a distant cousin. Her health had declined further. They asked if I wanted to visit. I sat with that message for a long time before answering. Then, I politely declined. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared about myself. I had spent years prioritizing everyone else's emergencies. I was done abandoning myself for people who had never protected me. Some nights, I still thought about the garage, about Justin pressing that notebook into my hands, about driving away in the dark with everything I owned in trash bags. Those memories no longer filled me with panic. They filled me with respect for the version of me who found the courage to leave. At work, I was promoted to lead a small project team. I stood in front of a group of professionals and presented ideas without my voice shaking. I was listened to, valued. That was new. I used to feel invisible. Now I felt seen. I started taking weekend trips, short hikes, museum visits, little adventures that reminded me the world was bigger than one toxic household. I learned what my laugh sounds like when it's real. I learned how it feels to come home to silence that comforts instead of isolates. I learned that peace doesn't have to be earned through suffering. It can simply be chosen. Therapy helped me understand that what I experienced wasn't just family conflict, it was emotional exploitation. I had been praised for being strong while being drained dry. I had been told I was selfish for wanting autonomy. Naming that gave me power. It helped me release the shame that never belonged to me. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, I want you to know something. Being the responsible one doesn't mean you have to carry everyone. Being loving doesn't mean accepting abuse. And being family doesn't mean unlimited access to your life. You are allowed to draw lines. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to rebuild. I didn't lose my family. I lost a role that was killing me. And in letting that go, I gained something far more valuable. Myself. I wake up now with purpose instead of dread. I go to sleep without replaying arguments in my head. I plan for the future, instead of just surviving the present. And every time Justin sends me a message about school, or asks for advice, I'm reminded why this mattered. Leaving wasn't selfish. It was necessary. It saved me. And it gave the next generation a chance at something better. There's a quiet kind of strength that settles into your bones once you've walked through something that could have destroyed you and come out the other side. It doesn't show up as confidence or bravado. It shows up as calm, as clarity, as the ability to sit with your own thoughts without spiraling into guilt. That's what my life looks like now. I wake up to sunlight instead of shouting. I go to work knowing my effort is valued. I come home to a space that belongs entirely to me. There's no longer a constant knot in my stomach, no longer a voice in my head reminding me of everyone else's needs before my own. And for the first time in my adult life, I feel grounded. Justin continues to be the brightest thread connecting me to my past and my future. He sends me updates about school, about new friends, about projects he's excited about. He talks about college like it's something within reach. Sometimes he asks for advice about classes. Other times he just sends me photos of something small that made him smile. Those messages remind me why breaking away mattered. He's learning what stability feels like. He's learning that adults can be consistent. He's learning that his life doesn't have to revolve around chaos. That alone makes every difficult decision worth it. The education trust keeps growing quietly in the background. I treat it like a sacred promise. Every deposit feels like I'm rewriting part of their story. I imagine Justin and his siblings one day opening that account and realizing they have choices, real choices, not just survival options. I don't need recognition for that. I just need it to exist. Occasionally, bits of information about Jada still reach me through distant relatives. She struggles to hold steady work. She moves often. She tells people I abandoned her. She insists everything that happened was unfair. I don't engage. I've learned that some people would rather protect their narrative than face their actions. That's not my burden anymore. Derek never resurfaced in my life. I heard he left town and started over somewhere else. I don't wonder about him. Some exits don't require closure. Grandma Lorraine's condition continues to decline. I hope she's comfortable. I hope someone is kind to her. But I also know that reconnecting would reopen wounds that took years to heal. I choose peace. That doesn't make me heartless. It makes me whole. One afternoon, while walking through a park near my apartment, I sat on a bench watching families pass by. Parents pushing strollers, kids chasing pigeons, couples holding hands. For a moment, I felt a wave of sadness for the life I thought I was supposed to have. Then I realized something important. I don't mourn that version of myself anymore. I respect her. She did the best she could in an impossible situation. And now, I get to build something new. I've started setting goals that have nothing to do with crisis management. Travel plans, career milestones, personal projects. I take weekends off without guilt. I say no without over-explaining. I protect my time like it's valuable because it is. Therapy taught me that I was never responsible for holding together a broken system. That love doesn't require self-destruction. That boundaries aren't punishment, they're protection. Those lessons changed how I move through the world. I no longer chase approval. I no longer negotiate my worth. I no longer apologize for needing space. And maybe the most powerful thing I've learned is this. You don't have to wait for permission to save yourself. If you're listening to my story and you feel trapped in a family dynamic that drains you, if you're the one paying the bills, raising the kids, absorbing the blame, and being told you're selfish for wanting more, I need you to hear something clearly. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to choose a life that feels safe. You are allowed to stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. Walking away doesn't mean you stopped loving them. It means you finally started loving yourself. I didn't escape because I was strong. I escaped because I was tired of disappearing. And now, every peaceful morning, every honest smile, every message from Justin reminds me that choosing myself didn't make me cruel. It made me free. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's that family should never feel like a prison. Love isn't supposed to cost you your peace, your future, or your identity. And being strong doesn't mean carrying everyone else while slowly breaking yourself. Sometimes, real strength looks quiet. It looks like walking away. It looks like choosing healing over guilt and boundaries over endless sacrifice. This journey wasn't just about escaping a toxic situation, it was about learning that shared blood doesn't give anyone permission to exploit your kindness. True family is built on respect, accountability, and mutual care, not manipulation or entitlement. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped, overlooked, or drained by people who were supposed to protect you, I hope it reminded you that you are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to rebuild. And you are never selfish for protecting your future. Thank you for staying with me through this emotional journey. For more powerful stories about resilience, justice, and reclaiming your life, please don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Tale Network. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more stories with you. And tell me in the comments what would you have done in my place.